Hey everybody, Greg Pruitt here with Idaho Dispatch, and this is the latest episode of The Deep Dive, and today I'm joined by Mr. Ron Nate, the president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation. How are you?
Great. How are you doing, Greg?
You know, good. As good as, I mean, Biden is not going to be in office, Kamala is not going to be in office, and hopefully Trump does really good, but I think we can all be blessed that it's not Biden or Kamala, or whoever was behind the scenes controlling Biden.
There we go. And it looks like Trump's picks for department heads are a lot better this time than last time around. I haven't seen a John Bolton yet.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few that, and we can get into that in a little bit, that I have some questions about. but overall, I think he seems to be doing more of this time what we were hoping he was going to do last time, right? And last time it did not turn out as great in terms of the John Bolton type picks that just like, oh my gosh. So, all right, well, before we get into all that, can you give people, I guess, a little bit of your background in terms of like, where did you grow up? You know, how did you end up meeting your wife?
Oh, sure.
How many kids you guys have? And let's just go from there.
I'd be happy to do that. I think I should mention that the reason why Greg is even talking to me at all out there is that I'm the president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, and so I've been in that position for a year now. And the Idaho Freedom Foundation is doing amazing stuff, holding legislators accountable, advancing good legislation that undoes restrictions on people, increasing freedom, lowering your taxes, limiting government, all those things. My story of getting here, I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, one of the suburbs there. I went to the University of Utah for college. I was a computer science major, but got converted to economics along the way. Met my wife in my second to last term there, Maria Nate. She's from Idaho Falls. And we got married in the fall of 1991. And went to graduate school at University of Connecticut and stayed in economics. And upon graduation, I became a professor of economics. First started out at Ohio University Eastern. Then from there, we heard that a school in Rexburg, Idaho, Ricks College at the time, was advancing to become a 4-year university, and they were hiring faculty for that change. And I was part of the first wave of new faculty at BYU, Idaho. And have started my career there, essentially.
How did you meet Maria, though? Like, you were from Utah, she's from Idaho. Where did that...
We met in my second last term in a business communications class. I needed an upper division business class. She needed a comms class, and we met there.
Okay, so you met at college.
At college, you betcha. Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so it's been great. What are we at? 33 years later, and we have 4 kids, and 4 kids have all graduated high school. We're empty nesters now, and let's see, we got 2 of them at BYU. We got 1 of them married and working in San Antonio, Texas, and my son just graduated this past spring, and he's now at the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
You got some questions for him, I bet.
Fascinating discussions. He's in economics too, and so we talk our little economics language.
Yeah.
But
what drew you to economics? I mean, that's a very specific kind of field there.
Well, it started in a very basic way, but then it turned out in something a lot more magical, I think, is that having started out in computer science and taking physics and calculus, everything like that along that path, I've always loved math, and when I had a friend that was in economics that said, "Hey, you ought to come take this class with me," I was like, "Fine, I need an economics class." So I went and took it. But economics is a place where you get to use calculus. I tell my students all the time that economics gives math a reason to exist because you can use it there. So the usual hiccup for students in economics is not being able to do the math. But I already had the math. I was picking up the theory of economics, and it was just a great combination there. And then when I went to the University of Connecticut, I didn't necessarily want to go into teaching, but part of my assistantship there was I taught discussion sections every Friday. And I found out that because I love economics, it made me a good teacher of economics because I just liked sharing all those principles. The things that that weren't obvious at first, but actually make a lot of sense, like comparative advantage and supply and demand and opportunity cost and unintended effects. It's just great sharing those things. And so I've loved teaching economics. And when the board of IFF came calling a year ago, just a little bit less than a year ago, and said, hey, our president is resigning, we need a new one, it's hard to give up a career that you've built up for about 25 years and to leave that and go into a new career, essentially, as an old guy. And so it's scary and risky, but it's just been fantastic. Being here, doing things that I haven't done before. I still teach economics almost on a daily basis. I just don't teach students. I teach legislators and the public about economics, and so I still get to apply all of that stuff.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm kind of curious, when you were going through school and when you were teaching, I mean, were you did you have to go down a certain economic route? Did they want, could you teach Austrian economics, or did you have to stick to Keynesian
that's a great question. The principles of economics are pretty basic and stayed, although you could still have Keynesian teachers emphasizing the role of government. You could have the classical economics guys emphasizing the role of the individual in the business. And so, but yeah, you can definitely put your twist on it. But when I was teaching the upper division classes like public economics and law and economics and quantitative methods, economics by itself is a conservative field because it is about independent decision making, looking at cause and effect, looking at economic efficiency, and all of those tend toward a conservative perspective. You almost have to twist economic theory to try and make it fit the liberal or commie perspective. Because, by the way, history is full of examples of prosperity that follows free market economics. History is also full of examples of the poverty and degradation and the conflict that comes about when you try and impose totalitarian command economy type principles. Venezuela is a great example. When they were free, they were prosperous. When a dictator took over and introduced communism, they have been struggling ever since.
When you taught economics at school, did you stick to mostly just helping them do a basic understanding, or did you always try to weave in, like, here's how it impacts your life with the government, here's what happened in Venezuela when it didn't go how it was supposed to go? I mean, were you able to tie that in quite a bit, or?
At first, I tried to say, look, here's the free market perspective, here's the Keynesian perspective, and blah, 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 and I'm not going to tell you which or whatever.
Sure.
But over time, being in the academic environment for decades, I realized that by and large, faculty are very liberal.
Yeah.
They are more indoctrination centers than education centers. And so the faculty, it's no surprise that the products we get out of higher education are more liberal and socialistic because their professors are all that way. So after realizing that, I said, you know what, there is no balance in higher education. So I decided I'm just going to present the balance. I'll be the balance. I'm just going to say, here's the two perspectives. You don't have to agree with me, but this one happens to be right, and here's all the evidence that supports it. And so I was more than happy to be a conservative voice in a very liberal atmosphere.
Yeah. Did you? So when I remember going to BSU, and I was probably one of the few conservative students. In most of my classes, and you always had this fear that, like, if I tell them my conservative viewpoint, I'm gonna get flunked, right? They're just gonna give me an F. Did you ever have liberal students that they were worried about, like, oh man, Professor Nate's gonna give me an F if I disagree with him on my paper? Or were you just like, hey, your opinion, do whatever? So
I had an astonishing number of students come up to me and appreciate the fact that I would give them any conservative perspective at all, because all they get was liberal communist perspectives. I did have a few liberal students who were very nervous about it, and they're like, wow, I cannot believe that you say those things. And they might have been worried about their grade, but they were also very complimentary at the end about how fair I am in my grading. I grade papers, not people. I grade the principles and the understanding of the economics, not the perspective you have on economics. And so it is possible. It's to be very fair in terms of your grading and everything, even though you are giving a perspective.
Yeah. So you were still teaching when you first ran for office. Golly, what year was that?
2014 was when I first ran.
When you first ran, and then you won.
Yep.
Because 2015 was your first. And I only know this because I've been going to legislative sessions since 2013 as an activist for gun rights. So,
Yeah.
So I remember you came in. I mean, so what was that like? You're out there teaching kids about economics, and then you get to come to the forefront of Idaho economics and what's happening with the government, what the government is or is not doing or shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
What was that like when you were like, okay, all this stuff I'm teaching my kids, these guys aren't doing any of it, or they're doing some of it, or what was that like?
Yeah, like I said, outside the classroom, it didn't mean I didn't teach economics anymore.
Yeah.
I was teaching economics from the floor of the house a lot, and it's because the momentum of government is towards more government, and those involved, I will give them this, that their heart is in the right place. They want to do what's right for the people. But there are corrupting influences in the Capitol, and there are also influences that take you away from the people's perspective and put you more in the government's perspective. So number one, corruption. I was surprised at just how dishonest folks were with me. There's some good people there, but there were a lot of people doing dishonest things, and it was fascinating that it was the leadership mostly that engaged in those deceptive tactics. First person to lie to me was a leader in one of the chambers there, and I could not believe it. And so there is that going on, but also there's a true ignorance about economics principles.
Yeah.
And so I had the opportunity to talk about unintended effects of policy from the floor, talk about opportunity costs. They all talk in terms of cost-benefit analysis, that we need to engage in this program because it's a great government investment, because the benefits outweigh the costs. Well, the benefits are always overstated. The costs are never fully understood.
Yeah.
And even if the benefits outweighed the cost in a strictly accounting perspective, what they have forgotten is the opportunity cost of taxpayers spending their money instead of government spending it for them. And the taxpayer usually gets higher utility and higher value out of their personal investments because their incentives are in the right place. If I don't do it well as a household, I'm going to lose out.
Yeah.
But if government doesn't do it well, there's no incentive to keep them in line.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I'd watch you give, these great, and you're a great orator on the House floor, and I remember sitting there thinking, okay, yeah, what he's saying makes sense, and I couldn't give you a specific example. I just remember that was a long time ago. I can barely remember my kids' birthdays, let alone Ron Nate's floor speeches from the House, but from 10 years ago, but. And you'd make these great arguments, and it was just like right over their heads. And so, how much of that is basically the either the lobbyists or some other departments or whatever have way more sway than common sense and what the people would probably want them to do?
I think the legislators are smart enough to understand an argument, but people get cemented in their beliefs about something. So even though I would make a sound economics argument, they had a belief system that contradicted that their personal experience or what they've always believed was counter to that, and what the lobbyists were telling them, because they had already committed to a position. And so they're reluctant to change their position. It's hard to change minds on a floor of a legislature there, because people already come in with their ideas about what the issue is at hand. But I had some good colleagues, and they grew over time in terms of numbers of fellow Liberty legislators who agreed with me, and we were able to be more convincing, to use parliamentary procedure to cast light on the problems of bills, and basically, as a Liberty legislator, you're playing 90% defense and 10% offense, trying to get legislation passed. Mostly, you're trying to stop bad things from happening, and usually those are tax increases in government programs, increases in infringements on rights, and we got more and more effective at it. When I entered the House, there were two of us Liberty legislators, myself and Heather Scott. By the time I left, I think there were like 13 in the House, and the election when I left, there were about 8 or 10 in the Senate. And now we're at like 13 in the Senate and close to 13 or 15 in the House. It's more liberty than it's ever been. We just need to consolidate that into good policy for Idahoans.
Yeah. Most a lot of people that are around now that are the activist class, if you want to call them that, they don't remember what it was like when there was none, and then there was just a couple, and what that was like versus now, where we should be able to really push some really good policy with the amount of not only active good legislators, but there's a lot more conservative activists that are mobilized and organizations and all that kind of stuff. And just comparing that, what we both remember from way back then to now, it's crazy.
Yeah, when I was running for election my first time, it was me and my kitchen cabinet. I had 6 volunteers around my kitchen table, and we met weekly to strategize my whole campaign. I raised $11,000 for my campaign, but right now $11,000 is just dust in the wind for campaigning. You need to raise $50,000 for a decent campaign in a competitive race.
Idaho.
It's amazing.
That's crazy.
And we were on our own. But now the conservative movement across the country indeed has other groups getting involved in Idaho politics, and I think for Idaho's good. Young Americans for Liberty has devoted a lot of resources to getting good people elected in Idaho, and they have changed the complexion of the legislature. I credit them with a number of seats being won that wouldn't have been won otherwise. We have Citizens Alliance for Idaho that are doing great things. Club for Growth is engaged with legislators here, and there's just great Idaho Freedom Foundation and Idaho Freedom Action has an education arm to it now. And so there's lots of organizations out there that act as support for liberty legislators that weren't there before. And so I think that's why we've seen some wins. I think that's why we've seen better policy come out. And that's why establishment is so scared and so angry all the time.
All the time, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, look, every group has, maybe errors that are made or lessons that are learned, and I don't want to get too deep into it. I know that, Julianne Young, that's been a criticism. One criticism of YAL was her loss and some of the mailing that happened in there, which you didn't have anything to do with, so you don't necessarily have to speak on it. But I just keep thinking back to, I didn't necessarily agree with that, but at the same time, like you said, there's so many big groups that have done so much good work. It's like, guys, you got to remember what it was like 10 years ago when there was no help, because the establishment's always going to have IACI's backing. They're going to have all the lobbyists, all of the big PACs. I mean, they would just have ungodly amounts of money, but 10 years ago. And now we're finally at a position where it's like, hey, yeah, you're raising $30,000 as the candidate, but guess what? There's another $50,000 coming in to expose who this person is, and and so
those kind of resources are necessary because the other side has so many more resources. No matter what the conservatives spend in a race, it's always multiplied against them by the establishment, by the liberal posses out there, and so to see the changes that we've seen have just been amazing. And by the way, it translates into good policy. Since I got there, we have achieved constitutional carry. We have stopped smut from going to kids from libraries and schools. We've put a stop to transgender surgeries and puberty blockers that are happening to kids. We have put enough pressure on leadership to get the income tax down from 7.4 to under 6%. And not only that, we flattened it so there's no cliffs. There's no disincentives to earning another dollar anymore. And so, we have conducted good changes, and there's still some to come. Universal school choice, getting taxes off groceries, getting DEI out of education, stopping Idaho as being a magnet for illegal immigration, promoting sound money issues, and getting budgets under control are all focuses that we're working on this legislative session. And with conservative legislative body members, we're going to be able to get a lot of that done.
Yeah. What is so you've been a lawmaker, and a year ago you became the president, somewhere around a year ago, the president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation. What is that like? And maybe for people that don't know, can you explain just briefly what the IFF is, what your goals are, what your purpose is as an organization?
Sure. In a sentence, the Idaho Freedom Foundation is an organization that wants to promote the American founding principles in Idaho and defeat Marxism wherever it exists so that Idahoans can prosper. That is our mission. And to accomplish that mission, we provide a lot of research and education of the populace and also of legislators. We also track legislation, rate it according to whether it's conservative or liberal or socialist or whatnot, and give each bill a rating according to a stable set of metrics that's not changing over time, so that each bill gets rated, and then legislators determine their own grade based on how they vote on legislation. No legislator can complain about their grade because they get to determine their grade based on their votes. If a legislator says, hey, I'm more conservative than my C grade says, I just say vote better, because the votes is where, is the proof in the pudding, right? And so I'll just show you that this is our document. It's the Idaho Freedom Index. We do it every year, and it gives you a grade of every legislator based on their votes. And I'll just show you a page of this. Just that's the worst page. That said, there's not a lot of great pages. So, but you can see. You'll see each legislator, you'll see their freedom grade and their spending index grade. And when they stand in front of you in a town hall and say that they're a conservative because they want to limit government, keep taxes low, and keep your rights protected, and they have an A- rating like Dan Foreman, he's largely correct. But if they're saying the same thing and they have an F rating like Ben Adams, they're not voting for freedom. They're not voting for liberty. They just say they are, because this tracks votes. And I know legislators complain about a rating on a particular bill.
Yeah.
That argument falls short too, because we rate 359 bills last session.
Rate a lot.
So even if they disagree with one, which they're bound to, or disagree with two,
Sure,
or whatever, it's hardly affecting their score at all. They have to vote wrong a lot to get a very poor grade like an F.
What is, you don't need to list them all off. I know you have a dozen or so metrics, because somebody may go, well, how do you rate it, or what's it all based really on? Is it? And I always told people it's either expanding government, shrinking government, or it's kind of in the middle. It's not really doing either or. Is that essentially it? And then there's a bunch of metrics that you use to
we have 14 metrics.
Is it 14? I thought it was 12.
Yep.
Okay.
And so we have, does it grow government or shrink government? Does it add to your taxes or take away from your taxes? Does it make something part of government that used to be private, or does it privatize something that used to be government? Does it violate the Constitution, or does it support your constitutional rights? Does it impose unjust penalties, including mandatory minimum sentences, or does it leave the discretion in the judiciary where it belongs? We've added a new metric for the first time ever, and that was that because of the culture wars that are going on now, we want to make sure that bills that are protecting children and protecting the traditional family from cultural attacks get rated positively too. So we added a metric that gives a plus for, does it promote Western values and protect children?
Okay, and that's different, because yours. Yeah. I remember. I interviewed Wayne Hoffman, the previous president, and he said they specifically left out social issues by and large and focused on other issues, and so that is a significant shift, like you said, and probably a good one because of the cultural fight that we're in.
It is. Who would have known we would be where we are today? 15 years ago, would you even think that somebody could stand there and say that they are a woman because they say they're a woman, or that we would have a man dressed as a woman as a military leader in the U.S. military? It's just bizarre to think that we've gone that far down the road, or that you go into your public library and there's things called Sparkle Boy or It's Perfectly Normal, which have cartoonish depictions of explicit sexual acts in books intended for children. We couldn't have predicted this 10 or 15 years ago when the index started, but we're there now.
Yeah.
And so it is a shift for the Freedom Foundation, but we can't afford to let our culture decay so much because of lack of legislative intentions on keeping families whole, keeping families together, keeping kids protected, and it's as important as the economy. It's as important as your constitutional rights.
Okay. Well, what do you think are if you had to pick 3 issues that, I mean, could be solved at the next session, or 3 top key issues that maybe the IFF thinks that the legislature should focus on, what would that be heading into next year?
Number 1, get the budgets under control. It's outrageous in a supposedly red state like Idaho that in the last 5 years our budgets have grown by 54%. You might look at that and go, well, COVID, brought in a lot of federal dollars. That's right, but our state budget also went up similarly. I think our state budget itself was something like 51% higher, and that was not the federal dollars. Even the years before COVID, we had similar increases.
Yeah.
Our government spends money like it's water. They're like drunken sailors on this stuff. And so we need our conservatives to stand up and say, look, we're going to vote on the maintenance budget to keep the lights on and the doors open, but we are not going to keep adding fluff to all of these agencies. I got to show you something, friends.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, friends. We're producing the pork report again. So the 2024 report on government waste in Idaho is it's being released tomorrow, as a matter of fact, on digital. So you can go to idahofreedom.org and tomorrow sign up for the pork report, and you can see dozens, 60 or more examples of government waste in Idaho, including things like Coeur d'Alene. They hired a poet. A city hired a poet. I don't know if taxpayers signed up for that or not, but their city council sure did. Idaho State Police, quote unquote, invested in new Mustang automobiles. Top of the line, totally tricked out, everything like that. When they were interviewed about it, they said, well, this will be assigned to a trooper, but really they look great in parades and they're great for public relations. I don't know what to say, friends.
Yeah. Look, a lot of Idahoans are back the blue and love the police, and I think we all support the police out there doing their job. But I don't really want to pay for a new police car just because it looks fun.
I know, and my son was looking at going in the military once, and he said, when they advertise things as military grade, he says that's kind of a joke because military grade historically has meant the most minimal means to get the job done. It's not over the top means.
Yeah.
And you know what? Our police forces used to work like that. I would rather support our police officers than support all the equipment and the capital of the division, right?
Yeah.
I would rather our officers get paid well than having a top-of-the-line automobile. And so when we look at things like the police, if you go back just a few decades, I had a friend pointing this out, that if you went and you saw an officer in downtown LA, they were in a sedan, probably didn't even have air conditioning, wasn't top of the line. It was a utility vehicle for getting a job done. And I think we've gotten to the point, and I know we're picking on police a lot, but I'm picking on all branches of government. We've gotten to the point that we're not doing simply what's necessary. They want government to be nice, too. They want it to be luxurious. They want fancy, shiny new buildings, fancy, shiny new schools. They want over-the-top equipment, and all of these extras that cost the taxpayer money but don't do a thing for the services government provide. Idaho Freedom Foundation, we're going to be the watchdogs. We're your Doge. We've been here for 15 years watching everything the government does, and we want to make government more efficient so that taxpayers can keep more of their dollars and still enjoy the limited services that government is constitutionally bound to provide.
Yeah. It's funny. So when I was in Iraq, we'd go to schools, and one of my favorite things to do is just, kids are awesome no matter where it is, and we'd go and we'd hand out candy and school supplies to these kids in these schools. And I'm not saying our schools need to mimic schools in Iraq, but it was just, here was a school, here's a school book, here's your school supplies. And now when we build a new school, we build these Taj Mahals. And I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, look, we can get a decent building that it has a roof over their heads and they do the work, but it's just massive Taj Mahals, and they just dump as much money as they can into building these things, and yet our education in this country continues to just plummet. It's awful, so I don't understand that.
At the risk of sounding like an old man, when I went to junior high school, I lived in Ontario, Oregon for a couple of years, and our junior high school was in a minimally refurbished armory.
Oh, really?
And so it was, old wooden floors, old paint on the walls and everything, but the work of education happened in the rooms and came from the teachers, not from the buildings.
Yeah.
And so the focus there was on the education. But now the focus is on, it's almost a contradiction to talk about free market and limited government when you're in an over-the-top school, right? And so I know people want things to be nice, but that's not the role of government. I would like to see what could be possible with school choice. I bet that if we had full school choice where the money followed the student to the best education opportunities and actually funded education instead of systems, we would see a lot better outcomes in education. We would see private schools develop that we can't imagine now, but would develop and would probably on a smaller basis, on a more bare bones basis, but provide great education because they had great teachers and great leadership. And I think you ask parents out there, would you rather have your kids in a nice brand new school or in a average school but with great teachers? I think they'll choose the last one every time.
Would that be your second thing, you think? Because I asked for 3, and I think you mentioned the budget.
Oh, I did. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Sorry, I'm way off track.
No,
I think the second
we're doing
thing,
the Donald Trump weave right now.
The second thing is school choice. Okay. Absolutely. And school choice, schools dominate our budget, our state budget, 62% on education. We're spending that kind of money, those resources, and getting mediocre at best results. Our 8th graders, reading proficiency, math proficiency, both stuck at 32%. And by stuck, I mean over the last 2 decades has not been better than 32%, even though the education budget is more than tripled in that time. But teacher proficiency, the grades given by administrators, 98% proficiency for teachers. I don't understand how those two statistics go together. The teachers are doing great, but students are stuck at 32%. We got to get that right. We're spending too much money to let our kids suffer in a mediocre education system. I'm not saying every public teacher is awful. I'm not saying any public teacher is awful. I'm just saying that the system that they're stuck in does not reward education excellence. And so competition does amazing things. When there's private schools competing for those education dollars, the private schools have to provide something that is attractive to parents. And with that incentive comes public schools wanting to respond and provide excellence themselves. And so everywhere we've seen school choice, we've seen 3 things. More happy, more satisfied parents, better education outcomes for the students, and get this one, better outcomes for teachers too. Teachers benefit by being competed for their education services too. Yeah. And so you get higher salaries. And so we need to work on that. I should get to number 3, huh?
Yeah, I guess real quick, because I did see that the homeschoolers, and this was a fight last year, and I presume it will be a fight again because I think I just saw another email that came out that. How do you address? Because I know you're a big proponent of homeschool. You're a big proponent of just a freer education market. We know that the unions and the liberals are going to come out against school choice no matter what. We know that. But it's also the homeschooling. A lot of the homeschoolers are also opposed, not because I think they don't want more education choice. Maybe a lot of them are just concerned that the homeschooling will come under attack, because we do live in one of the few states where homeschool is almost kind of a free-for-all, do whatever you want, versus other states where there's a lot of government interference in the homeschooling process. So how do you, I guess, assuage those concerns?
Absolutely. First of all, I would point out it's not a lot of homeschool families that feel that way. It's a very vocal minority of homeschool families that have a healthy fear of government overreach, right? And so they are worried that if we have the money follow the student, that the government is going to take that as an opportunity to regulate schools, regulate private schools, regulate micro schools, and then regulate homeschools. So they're afraid of the overreach of government touching their homeschool models. I get that. However, I would point this out, that they're always under threat of government overreach. You don't need school choice as an excuse for the government to come in and try and regulate homeschools or private schools or anything like that. They could do that at any time. And so that fear is not one that comes from a school choice model. It's one that exists all the time. And to our credit, we have been able to fight back any legislative attempts to regulate schools outside the public school system. And I don't expect that would change under a school choice model. That said, the school choice bill that we're suggesting is an education tax credit. It's not even government expenditure on school. It's saying that if you have a kid that's not in public schools and therefore you're choosing a private option, then you don't pay as much in taxes. You get a tax credit, and that money that you don't pay in taxes increases your ability for the private school option. So it's not government paying anything at all. It's just families keeping more of their tax dollars instead of sending it to government and to the public school system. And so that should be okay. In fact, in the bill, it has specific restrictions saying government cannot regulate the private schools or the homeschools from this. It has no bearing on that. It doesn't even allow for teacher certification or for standardized tests for students that are outside the public school system.
Do you think we could do a constitutional amendment at some point, potentially to protect homeschooling for good? Would that be necessary? Would that be...
I think that would be great. I think it would be awesome. And you know what? I'd be right there with them, arm in arm. The homeschool advocates out there, let's write a constitutional amendment that like our Constitution does, it limits the government by saying they do not have a right to interfere in your public school options. And we say this by having a negative right here saying that families have a right to educate the kids in any manner they want without government influence, and therefore government can't infringe on that right. Let's go. I'm with you.
That's last year. That's what I kept thinking. Well, let's do a constant, because I agree. I want to make sure it's protected, and I also would have loved to have that school choice option as well. So.
I think Idahoans would vote for that too, because what Idahoans are out there saying that no, we need to have government regulate you. I don't think many Idahoans would agree with the counter
Democrats in the state. Yeah, we would. I think it would easily pass. I really.
It would be like the Prop 1 vote. It'd be like 2-1, easy.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, number 3.
Yeah. Oh, number 3. Taxes. Taxes are always the big issue, and the easy one, the low-hanging fruit, is get rid of grocery tax. There's only 4 states that fully tax groceries. I cannot believe that red state Idaho is one of the 4 states that fully tax groceries. It's crazy. I know some might say, well, there's a tax credit. I didn't put the tax credit in place. We're still taxing groceries. I can reduce everyone's grocery bill by 6% just by removing the tax on groceries. Yeah. And if you want to remove the credit and raise everyone's income tax, run that bill. But I'm running the bill to reduce taxes on groceries. Get rid of it.
And the weird thing is, this has been such a strange fight, because I think even among conservatives, we're fighting over, well, let's just increase the credit instead of... And I'm like, well, why don't we do both? We waste so much money as a government. Why can't we get rid of the grocery tax and just keep the credit?
Yeah, we can do that.
I want as much of my money back as possible.
And by the way, the history of the credit was never a grocery tax credit. It was simply an income tax credit. Started in the 1960s. In 1990s, they started to talk about it as being a grocery credit somehow, and it never was intended that way. It wasn't until 2003 that it was ever put in code that it was a food tax credit. It's nuts to call it a grocery credit. They just added that word to stop people from getting rid of the grocery tax. Believe it or not. That is the political history on this. And so it is this weird battle of the tax versus the grocery tax credit. But I'll tell you what, the current system is unfair. It's redistributive as it stands, because here's what goes on. You buy groceries, You send your money into government, and then the promise from government is that you'll get your money back somehow with this tax credit at income tax time. I don't know anyone who feels comfortable about sending money in as a tax with the promise that it comes back to you as a tax credit.
Sure.
It's a weird system. Why not just let us keep our money to begin with? But some people who don't buy that many groceries get more of a credit back than they ever spent in taxes.
Correct, yeah.
Some people who live on the border and go to Ontario, Oregon all the time for their groceries might not pay a dime in grocery taxes in Idaho, but they get the full credit.
Yeah.
There's no fairness in that. And it's just weird to say that those two things must be attached when, number one, historically they haven't been, and number two, why say let's get rid of the grocery tax, but only if you get rid of the credit? It's like saying, sure, cut this tax, but you have to raise another one to justify it. No, we don't even say that with spending. We don't say, all right, you can spend on this if you reduce this spending. We never say that, but for some reason with taxes, we have to say it. I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss.
The weirder, I mean, I guess that's true too.
Yeah.
The interesting one for me was there's this argument like, well, what about all the tourists that come in and buy groceries? And I kept thinking, this sounds a lot like, so do you remember we passed constitutional carry in 2016?
Yeah.
And then immediately the year after is when Christy Zitto, who's thankfully coming back, we started fighting to get rid of the residency requirement because you had to be a resident of Idaho to have this constitution. And I'm like, and seriously, there were gun owners even that were like, well, when Washington State recognizes our constitutional carry, then we'll recognize them. And I'm like, guys, we're talking about rights here.
Yeah.
What are we doing? Why are we... we should be united against the government overreach that is happening, and that's how I feel about the grocery thing. I'm like, we're taxing people's food. That's wrong. I don't care who it is. Like,
it's a tribal mentality and a very liberal mentality to say that, hey, we need to keep this tax in place because we get money from tourists. Well, number one, why do we have a stupid tax system in place that taxes all Idahoans for the mere fact that some tourists end up paying some of it?
Yeah.
As an Idahoan, that offends me. Number two, why do we think that tourists need to fund our government?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no justice in that. Why do tourists have to pay for our government? And number three, why is their money going to government any great thing for us? I would rather we not tax tourists, leave more money for them to spend on Idaho businesses.
Yeah.
And hotels and outfitters and restaurants instead of going to Idaho government. Well, I don't understand this mentality that we need to tax outsiders. Might as well just put gates at the borders and have a fee for entering Idaho if that's your mentality.
Maybe a fee if you're a Democrat coming up. Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't get it. Like, guys, we can all be united on this against the government taxing us more of our money. Like, why are we fighting over which? Like, just do both. I'm okay with doing both. I'm just anyway. Yeah, I don't know. Awesome. Well, anything else in terms of the IFF? What's your guys' vision look like here for the near future?
Our vision is positive. Idaho Freedom Foundation. We take a lot of heat. Because we hold legislators accountable with our Freedom Index, because we stand up for the people and not for the hardened special interests, the liberal media, and the legislators who don't score well all want to trash the IFF. I get that. We're willing to take those arrows and bullets. That's fine. But Idaho Freedom Foundation, through its work, has been very effective. This has been the most successful year of the Idaho Freedom Foundation ever. The amount of research that we've put out, the amount of articles, the amount of the information that we've put out with our Idaho Freedom Index and our pork report, we've done all of that this year. And our partners have responded. Our partnerships have increased. We have more people who are members of the IFF, more people engaged on our social media, and more people willing to contribute to our effort than ever before. And so whatever you hear about the Idaho Freedom Foundation, we've had our best year ever, and 2025 is going to be even bigger than that. And I'm super excited for getting policy wins, growing the movement, and making Idahoans' lives even better. We're defeating Marxism everywhere, and they hate it.
Awesome. All right. Well, where can people go to learn more about your organization?
Let's go to idahofreedom.org. On idahofreedom.org, you can see all of our research. You can see our Idaho Freedom Index. Starting tomorrow, you can sign up for a copy of the pork report, and you can see everything we do. You can sign up to join us in our efforts, and know when our events are coming, Capital Clarity during legislative session, our podcasts that we post regularly, it's all there. IdahoFreedom.org.
Awesome. All right. Well, Mr. Nate, appreciate you sitting down with me.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the time.
That was good.
Yeah, thank you for the work you do at Idaho Dispatch. You guys do amazing stuff, and more information is always better, especially when the majority of information is coming from the liberal left.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys. Well, be sure to follow the Idaho Freedom Foundation, all their hard work. Be sure to subscribe to the Idaho Dispatch as well. Take care, and God bless.